Hello and welcome back to the Starting Story podcast with me, Krishna Palmer. Here we get to talk to business leaders about their insights into life, business, and the real stories behind their success. Today we have someone interesting, someone who's worn many hats. Joseph Deskins is a seasoned business coach, best-selling author, and dynamic public speaker. But his journey is far from conventional. He's also, on the side, he's a former professional surfer, a certified arborist, and a successful entrepreneur who's built and scaled his own businesses. He's got years of experience in guiding entrepreneurs and professionals, so brings a unique perspective on perseverance, leadership, and personal growth. Whether it's navigating the challenges of business, mastering time management, or finding purpose in the unexpected, Joseph has the insights to help you take your journey to the next level. So let's dive into Joseph's journey and his advice for those who are trying to start their own business and get into this space, or for those that are needing a direction in life. Joseph, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast today, especially being so early, 3 a.m. over there. It means a lot. How are you doing?
Doing very good. Thank you for having me, Krishna.
Amazing. Well, I wanted to ask, first of all, the intro, again, probably doesn't do justice to the amount of things we're doing in the background. So I thought I'd start off by just asking, for someone who's got so many things going on, what is the secret to staying mentally multitasking?
Mentally multitasking. Okay, obviously a lot of it diet and exercise. I
Mm.
mean, obviously you got a lot. You got to keep your brain going. I remember what made an impact on me once is I was watching the international chess champion,
Oh.
right? And somebody asked him the same question, and he says, "I jog for an hour a day. I get out and run." And that keeps me. I need to get that exercise to keep my mental clarity. So I'm still tree trimming and rescuing cats and surfing. And when I do have a day when I'm just sitting around all day doing things like this, sitting in a chair
Mm.
on the computer and stuff like this, I'll pop outside and split wood for an hour. So or even go skateboarding if I don't have any wood out there to
Mm.
split. I'll go skateboarding at the park. I got a park about 2 blocks away. So always making sure because I'll feel like my brain go numb. I can only do this for about 4 hours before my brain goes numb, and I just start going because I'm used to exercise, and so when I feel that approaching, then off to exercise I go.
Wow, okay. Exercise. So many people say exercise, right? But you've got your own little things, skateboarding going on, tree chopping. But I so agree with that. Even today, before coming to the stadium, I had a little cycle. I cycle kind of everywhere. So I
Uh-huh.
cycle to the studio, or sometimes where, let's say I've, you know, caught the bus to the studio instead, there's a leisure center really nearby, so I'll go swimming. So sometimes I do that before my episodes. But I agree, it gets the brain just like clear, doesn't it? And
Yeah.
it means you're active. It means because your blood's been pumping, you're active, and it's surprising. So many people who haven't tried it may not believe it, right? And then when
Mm-hmm.
they do try to get something active going, and for everyone that's different, it might just be a walk. There's something you're like, my God, the mental clarity was something else. Um, and clearly you've taken that to another level. Okay, so obviously getting to this point where you're doing so many things, do you want to talk a bit more about your story and kind of where you started from? What was maybe your first step you took into being your own boss, being an entrepreneur, and how's that guided you to where you are today?
Okay, I guess the first steps I started taking was when I was 15, making money. I was out mowing lawns and pulling weeds and stuff like that, just around the neighborhood. And then my cousin came home one day and said, "Hey, we need to trim trees. You make a lot more money,
Mm.
right? Because you got the danger factor." I don't know. We were making like $5 an hour. I think minimum wage was like 315, going to 320 when I was just getting into the workforce here in San
Wow.
Diego. Yeah, and so then I don't know what I was getting $5 an hour or something to climb trees, and so just the risk factor, danger factor meant a few extra bucks,
Mm.
and so that's what we're after, right? Making the few extra bucks, especially at that age. Just having a job makes the parents happy,
Mm.
but then if you can do something to make a few more bucks, then that helps. So that's where I got my start as far as business. And then, of course, I went on to, I officially made it a business when I got saved in August 20th, 1985. I stopped working at the local restaurant and said, okay, I'm going to do this full time. made it a business, got a contractor's license, got certified as an arborist with the International Society of Arboriculture, ISA, and just kept growing. It's always about taking the next step. So
Hmm.
there's always a next step. And so last week, my next step, I was at the Maxwell conference in Orlando. I was there for 3 days, so that kind of gets you charged up. And then I spoke at the Sticker Shock Daniel Gomez Speaking Academy, and so got some action items there too. So always got a full plate of next things to do.
Wow. So you started off kind of you didn't actually go straight into a job, did you? You kind of almost were like a freelancer, but you're obviously very young, and going into it. But that would have taught you some essential skills, such as, not everyone just goes around saying, I need to get my tree cut. Sometimes you have to go to people and say, oh, that tree looks like it might need cutting. You need help with that, or kind of spotting the opportunities, right?
Right.
So is that something you kind of learn? What were the kind of, if you took your mind back, I think even though it's easy to say that, oh, I started a job early, there's probably so many things that taught you. And are there any of those things that you can remember right now?
Right. So, it's always about finding work. Part of the next step is finding your next customer.
Hmm.
And so, at that age, it was just knocking on doors. I remember that's when I started. And, here in Southern California, the busy time is during the winter. There's a lot of trees you can't trim during the summer. And, we have a lot of tourists and whatnot, vacation and whatnot. So during the summer was the hard, slow time. And so, nevertheless, that was really when we wanted to be working.
Yeah.
But for me, it was easy. In the sense that you just walking through the neighborhood, you see people with trees, you go, that those people need it. I started with palm trees. That was the simplest thing. And I remember right going down to 11th Street. I got a job right by the beach, one house from the beach.
Hmm.
That's where I was going surfing, right? And they had trees down there, and I talked to them. I got a job trimming their tree. And the palm trees, they get to a certain point of maturity when they're like 20, 30 feet high, and the husks start pulling out, right?
Right.
And so I was climbing this tree, and I reached a point. I didn't have any safety stuff. I just had a handsaw, a pair of gloves, a Levi jacket, a hat that I wore, and a Sony Walkman. Of course, I needed that to have the music in my
Yeah.
ears. And then so I was climbing that tree, and I got to the point, and then the things started pulling out, right? And so I couldn't climb it anymore, and it was dangerous, right? And so I reached my point, and so then I went and I got a friend who had climbing gear,
All right.
and so then I actually started using climbing gear and safety stuff, and so that was my next step at that point.
Hmm. Okay, so that's a couple of times you repeat that in terms of looking for the next step, which I think
Yeah.
is kind of like a small stage in terms of like thinking about things on a grander level, right? Because
Hmm.
all the time in these episodes and every time I ask people, I can always imagine that if I was to see someone at this kind of high point, right, in terms of being successful or, someone advising other people, there's always this element of like looking up the mountain and going, how on earth did they get up there, right?
Right.
And a lot of times people say that at the beginning they had no clue. Like no one really at the start says, well, I knew I was going to get there anyway. That just, it was an easy walk
Uh-huh.
for me. No one says that. It's always
Right.
that I had no clue. I just took the next step and then I still had no clue and I just kept taking another step and just kind of followed my gut and it took me wherever, right? So on this journey of you from when you started at the age of 15 to where you are now, can you remember any crucial steps? Of course, the whole process was taking steps, but can you remember any pivotal ones where it really kind of maybe like thrust you into the forefront and you were kind of exploring something completely different?
Right. Yeah. So exactly. So at one point, I was in a financial ditch. Right. So I was married. I was in a ditch,
Hmm.
and the situation was getting worse. And in that moment, I just prayed a simple prayer. I said, "Lord, you see this ditch? It's getting deeper. I don't know how to get out of it.
Hmm.
Please help." Right. And I said, I know that no matter how deep this gets, you can get me out of it. Right. And so I was asking for help. And so then a month or two later, I was sitting on my couch reading John chapter 15. And so, just in case you don't know, it says, I'm the vine, you're the branches, abide in me. That's the message there. And so, as I was reading that, the Lord spoke to me. He said, you need to get out of the tomato business and into the peach and avocado business.
Mm.
And so I heard that, and it didn't make sense because I thought about my yard. I had no tomatoes, but I did have peach tree and I had an avocado tree. And so it sounded like I had already done that. Right. And so then I go, so it doesn't make sense. What do you mean? And he likened tomatoes to your 9 to 5 job, like I did with tree trimming. I go out, I trim a tree, I get paid, and it's over. And I got to go find another tree to trim, or else I'm not going to make any money. Right.
Yeah.
And so that's where most people are at. They go to work, they work all week, they get paid Friday, or they get paid at the end of the month, however they do it, and then they have to start over. They have to show up for work again Monday. And so that's a tomato. So you plant a tomato from seed, it grows, you get a crop fairly quickly, and then it dies and you have to start over.
Mm.
And that's the life of a tomato. So the peaches, the peach tree I had in my yard, my sister gave me this peach. It was just a couple inches tall. She has a peach tree at her house, and the peaches fall off, some of them, and they rot on the ground, and some of them sprout, right? And so she had one, and she gave it to me. I planted it in my yard, and the next summer, it gave me one peach. So it took a year, right? And then the next year, it had 50 peaches. The next year, it had 100 peaches. And so peach trees can go on to live for generations, right?
Mm.
Hundreds of years.
Right.
And so then you're just getting continual peaches. You do, a minimal amount of maintenance, make sure it's getting water, et cetera, et cetera. No bugs are getting it, et cetera. And then it'll just keep producing. And the avocados are a little different because if you plant an avocado, you may not see your first avocado for 5 to 15 years,
Whoa.
right? Yeah. And so you plant it from seed and it grows and you're going, it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, no avocados, right? And then finally one day, boom, you get avocados. And so that's how a lot of businesses work. You go to work, you develop your business, and you're not really making anything for a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years.
Mm.
And then one day, boom, you've got it. I mean, you think about just like a doctor. If you're a doctor, they have to go to school for so many years, and maybe the other guy who just got a job at the gas station or whatever, he's making money, he's not going into debt, but the doctor's going to be better off in the long run.
Mm.
But a lot of businesses are like that. So a good example of where I put that to work is right here. This is one of my books right there. Hosea, the prophet who married a prostitute.
Yeah.
So God gave me that book too. And it took me 10 years to write it. And so I wrote it. I finally wrote it. I got it published. And then once I finished it, I realized I didn't know how to market. I already knew that because I'd already written a book before that and sold zero. And
Okay.
so I'm rewriting it now. But at that time, I didn't know how to market, right? I didn't know anything about marketing in that sense, right? I could knock on a door and, climb a tree, but I didn't know how to market a book. And I didn't want to when I did the first one. And so, but when I did this one, I'm all, okay, God gave me this book. I need to market it. I need people to read it. And so I've been learning marketing.
Right.
And so marketing is very different for tree trimming and book reading, right? Book selling. So it's a whole different level, and it just takes time to learn. So once you learn it, you can master it and sell a lot of books.
Mm. Amazing. So that was kind of a pivotal moment because you kind of recognized that I'm in the wrong mindset almost in terms of how I need to run myself and my money. And I
Right.
like that kind of tomato, like comparing the plants because it does show, doesn't it? It's that kind of like short-term loss for long-term gain kind of concept, which is so difficult initially to picture because we're evolutionary designed to look for the short term gain all the time. But obviously, in the modern world,
Right.
that's not always the best route, is it? And this book as well, I'm glad you brought it up because I had a look at it, um, and I kind of I wasn't able to read it, but I had a kind of look at what it was about. But I didn't fully understand what it was. I mean, the title itself is a bit confusing, isn't it? The prophet who married a prostitute. I was like, what? That doesn't really make sense to me. So do you want to explain a bit more? What is it about, and why was it that this book is? Why is this book designed to kind of change people's frame of thinking? Why is it good at doing that?
Okay, so I'll tell you where it came from. At one point in my life, my habit was to get the kids up, get them off to school, and then I would come home and I would pray for an hour, right?
Hmm.
And so at that point, my prayer was walking around the kitchen, around the house, and praying. And so on one particular day, I was doing that, and so prayer on that day was a little different. I was praying in the spirit, just walking around. I could tell things were different. And then so that was a half an hour. And then the second half hour, this book came to be, but it really came to me as a movie. So I didn't have a vision. I just had an understanding of a movie. So it's
Okay.
kind of hard to, yeah, it's hard sometimes to explain how God moves on you. But nevertheless, I didn't actually see it, but I understood a movie. And so I got excited about it. I took some notes, and then I got to writing, and so I had a lot of challenges. That's why it took 10 years. I had many challenges, got divorced. I was taking care of all four of my kids. So that was a pretty huge job, and running a business,
Yeah.
so many things going on. And so that's why it took a long time. But Hosea, it's a modern day interpretation of the book of Hosea, meaning as if Hosea were here today alive. So it's a novel, it's a story. And so I wrote the book first. Um, like I was like caught between book and movie as I started writing. So my tenses were all jacked up. I was like, oh, this thing doesn't make sense. And so then I finally decided, okay, I'm just going to write the book first and then do the movie. So I wrote the book, and then I've written the screenplay. And this June, I have an appointment with a movie producer. So things are moving along.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay. So again, another step taken. You're getting that into a movie, which is nice. A little visual way of getting your point across, right?
right.
Um, and then so you've kind of got this book, and you're taking those steps. At what point did you start to teach other people and help them? Like, at what point did you have, I suppose, the confidence really to believe that I now know enough and can do enough to maybe impact someone else's life?
Right. So I'm a pretty good communicator. I think that, just left by myself, I'm a little bit more of an introvert, but then once get rolling, I'm pretty good extrovert communicator type person.
Nice.
Um, but in the course of tree service, my tree service business, I have several people that I helped. I think 5 people start their own business. And so, like, a lot of people are afraid to help other people. They think,
Yeah.
oh, they're going to take my business, right? But I didn't think that way at all. And so, just as people came to me wanting to learn and do their own thing, I went for it. I said, okay, I'll do everything I can. So, um, that translated, of course, into going online and speaking and stuff like that. One day I just said, okay, well, let's take this to a broader audience and see who else we can help. And so really, you just find your own sweet spot
Yeah.
and go after that. That's your wealthy place. The thing, whatever it is that makes you special, unique, different, the you're good at, and you can help other people, then that's where you need to be.
Right. And of course, there's loads of people that help other people, right? So, what is it
Uh-huh.
that kind of like you kind of bring different? So, because people have different ways, either they teach something different or they have a selective
Mhm.
kind of process to who they're going to teach in the first place. Because obviously, if you go in saying, I'm going to teach absolutely anything that comes to me, then some people you're going
Mhm.
to resonate with, some people you're not going to resonate with. So you have to have some kind of
Right.
screening process, right? How does that look like for you?
Right. So that's a challenge because, I can do a lot of things. And so, what people say is pick one thing
Mm,
and do that. And so that's really hard for me to do. But so I can help in a lot of ways. So, obviously everybody's different. So I have my own uniqueness. But what I would do is help people that are want to get started or are started and want to grow,
right.
right? And so that's where I would help, and especially starting their own business. What do I do? And you need encouragement. You need the next step, right? The next right thing.
Yeah.
And people need encouragement because it's easy to just get frustrated or whatever, and or just get sidetracked. There's so many different ways to get sidetracked, and so just to have the accountability. And then of course, I'm operating from the biblical principles
Mm-hmm.
and looking to be led of the Spirit. And I notice a lot of the times, especially, like, I guess my most recent thing was just in coaching. Just um I was stressing over something a couple weeks ago,
Right.
maybe a month ago, and just kind of in the afternoon, evening, just kind of going, "Whoa, this is kind of big for me." And then, in the morning, when I woke up, right when I woke up, I saw how to do it, right? How I can do this.
Mm.
So that's happened to me a bunch of times. So you just go to sleep, and maybe you're a little bit stressed out, but you can sleep it off, and the next day, you start over. And so, and when you wake up in the morning, that's just a really good time before things are moving, for God to speak to you and give you some instruction and say, "Hey, this is what you're doing. Your mind is clear, your spirit is clear. You're just waking up." And that's a really good time for him to kind of download something into you.
Mm. Well, that's a good point you raised because you told me before the recording actually started that you kind of wake up at 4:30 every single day, which to the normal person is exceptionally amazing because that is something that people can't commit to.
Mhm.
And even like for me, I'm trying to get down to like 6:30, and I'm gonna try and wean myself into 5:30 kind of thing. But yeah, again,
Mhm.
4:30 and stuff, it seems like, whoa, that's unbelievable. So how do you kind of keep yourself, it's all good teaching other people, but how do you keep yourself almost accountable and keep yourself sticking to a schedule? Because I notice whenever you're doing, when you're at work, you always got a
Mhm.
boss or you've got like a colleague who's always going to make sure you're there for 9 o'clock. If you're not, there's going to be repercussions. So when you're working for yourself, the
Right.
repercussions are decided by yourself, and you can always start to go leading on yourself. And often I'm sure you've gone through that phase where you've gone leading on yourself, and then you go to bed that day and go, why, I should have got more work done, or I had stuff I needed to do but I didn't. How do you keep yourself accountable so that as soon as you wake up in the morning, you know that you're not going to fall back to kind of the lower standards that you set yourself?
Yeah, yeah, that's tough. So you do have to have your own accountability. That's what makes self-starters and entrepreneurs different, that
Mm-hmm.
they're willing to hold themselves accountable. And so, but I do have coaches for different things, right? Book writing, coaching, speaking. And so there's accountability there.
Mm.
And it is easy sometimes to shirk that, but once when you pay money, you're all like, wait a second, I paid X many $1,000 for this.
Yeah.
I'm not going to waste that money. Um, uh, so that's a big motivator. And then, always the bills never stop coming. And so, if you don't get yourself going, nobody's going to do it for you. And and that's where the saying comes, we're willing to do entrepreneurs are willing to do the things that other people aren't willing to do.
Mm.
So that's how you get into the top couple percent there, is to be willing to do the hard work. And you have to have vision. That's the biggest thing, really. I think that's the answer to your question. You have to have vision. Just thinking about professional surfing. um I used to get up early to go surfing. One of one of my oldest memories, well, two of them is like I would go, we have what's called dawn patrol. And for some people, dawn patrol surfing means they get up at dawn and slowly make their way to the beach.
Whoa.
But for me, dawn patrol means you're in the water already before the sun comes up. That's
Wow.
dawn patrol, right? And so I remember when I was a kid, there was one guy that would surf 8th Street in Del Mar with me. And so some days he would be the first one out, and some days I would be the first one out. And so it was always like I would, when I showed up there to go surfing, I would go, is he out yet? You know, is he going to be first today or am I going to be first? And I remember one day also, like I used to skateboard to the beach. I lived about, a little bit over a mile, somewhere a mile to 2 miles from the beach. And so I would skateboard down there. And so there's a hill I went down. I remember one morning I was in the dark, like it was pitch dark. And I would just go down on my butt, because that was faster to get down the hill, right?
Oh.
And a little bit safer. And, and so I'd have my feet on the ground. And one morning I hit my foot on one of those reflectors for the fire hydrant, because there weren't any reflectors in the street, right?
Right.
But there was just that one for the fire hydrant, so that the firemen would see it when they're coming down the road. And so I hit my foot on that and I twisted my ankle. And I was fine surfing. I couldn't walk. Like I remember when I got out of the water, I like fell over
Yeah.
because I had twisted my ankle, but it surfed fine. Like I couldn't even tell when I was surfing, but walking was hard. I don't know how that worked out, but that's how it worked. But that was the commitment at that time, to get up and get out there before anybody else when there's nobody in the water. And
Mm.
the in case you didn't know, usually the ocean is glassy in the morning, um, and then the wind picks up after a few hours and it blows out and it's not as good anymore.
Mm.
And then sometimes you get Santa Anas or different wind situations and it stays clean all day. Oftentimes the wind dies down in the afternoon again, so the morning and the evening are usually the best times to surf. And so you
Right.
kind of you plan your day around that, right?
Mm.
So that's the commitment. A lot of people aren't willing to do that. Get up in the dark and get started.
Well, I mean, that's something that you kind of enjoyed, right? And, surfing is something that you enjoy. Like the same with me, I play badminton. And again, sometimes I have times when people have said, oh, we've got a badminton court booked for 8 a.m. or 7 a.m. And I'm like, say less, I will make sure I'm there. Even if I
Right.
was planning to wake up at 7, because now there's badminton at 7, I'll wake up an hour
Mhm.
earlier because I want to be there. But I suppose the
Mhm.
real dedication is when you have something you don't want to do. And I'm sure in business, even if it's a business you enjoy, right? Let's say it's a business you love, there's always that side admin work of sending emails or making sure there's kind of like links are being formed and like everyone's informed of what's going on. There's always something boring whenever you're trying to do something
Right.
in business. So how do you tackle that? And I suppose the other thing is, not only how do you tackle that, but then if someone comes to you with that problem, now that you're kind of coaching others, and they say that, I found this fun and I want to do it more, but there's just this boring thing that means that I just can't be bothered. What kind of advice do you give them that goes, you need to stay motivated, you need to get this done?
Uh-huh. Yeah, once again, it goes back to vision. You're looking at the backside. You have to be willing to make that short-term sacrifice for the long-term goal.
Yeah.
And sometimes it just feels like you're stuck in the mud,
Yeah.
and that's not fun. You're like in the mud and you're trudging through the mud, and it's just a terrible feeling, but it is what it is. You have to have the vision for the goal. You're gonna get through this and get to the good part. And whether that's family or money or whatever it is, a house, whatever that goal is, if you don't have that vision, it's like the Bible says, without a vision the people perish. So
Mm.
you got to have a goal up there to get through. I was thinking, like, when I went to Hawaii twice. And so they have these rain squalls, right?
All right.
And so one morning it was raining, it was pouring, and then it stopped. And so I went down to the beach. I went to Rocky Rights, that's on the north shore of Oahu. And there was a few people out because it'd been raining, right?
Yeah.
So people were waiting for the rain to stop. And so then I paddled out, and then more poor the waves were really, really good. It was like 6 to 8 and smoking barrels. It was very good. And so then I surfed for a while. I got crowded quickly. And then another rain squall came in.
Oh.
And so everyone bailed out. And I said, you know what? This is going to pass. It's going to rain for a little bit. It's going to go through. And so I'm just going to sit out here and wait for it. And then when it's over, I'll be the only one out and I'll get to surf all by myself. And so I did that. And so I was out there and it rained so hard. I could not even see the beach. I was out there getting pelted. It was crazy because it's like the waves stopped breaking. I don't know why that happened,
Oh.
right? But for like 20 minutes, the waves stopped breaking. The rain was coming down, pelting hard. Lightning was hitting the water like about 2 miles away. And so the lightning goes boom, it hits the water, and there's like a blue blanket on top of the water for about a second, that goes
Whoa.
like a couple hundred yards out or so. I don't know how far, something like that. And so, all of that was going on. I was just sitting out there waiting. And so sure enough, it happened. Like everybody bailed out, right? And then boom, it was over. And then all of a sudden the waves turned back on. They just started coming in. And there I was all by myself. And so I surfed about 40, 45 minutes before the next person paddled out. And then slowly it got more crowded. And then the wind turned. And so it was time to go. And so I had a good hour and a half to 2 hours, before, it got crowded and the wind turned
Mm.
and everything went south. So that was definitely, so that was, it wasn't a long term, result. It was short term, but it was definitely a sacrifice, and it definitely worked out. It was great. It was
Mm.
really good.
Well, I suppose it can all be extrapolated, right? I mean, in that moment, it was just 20 minutes of kind of torrential downpour to then get
Right.
like an hour of, fun on your own with amazing waves. But then that can always be extrapolated. People say you can spend 1 year really working on something which is just kind of like a grind. But then that 1 year will eventually then turn into this amazing kind of next 5, 10 years where you look back and you're like, I'm
Mhm.
glad I did that. I'm glad I worked hard. I'm glad I talked to people. I'm glad I did these events and stuff because now it's got me
Right.
where I am today. So it's kind of that same logic, isn't it? Of like sometimes you do have to just go through the pain when most people would not, and that's what makes you different. It's
Right.
all about being different. There's a reason that you're an entrepreneur, because you're different, right?
Right. And so, it may take time. So like part of the um, tomato, peach, avocado thing was how to do this. And the
Mm.
way God put it to me is He put it. I don't know if you know how many hours are in a biblical work week. If you've ever thought that out, so it's 6 days a week, right? So
Uh
we
huh.
get the 6 days from Genesis, and then you have 12 hours a day, and that came from the landowner who owned land, and he went out periodically throughout the day and got people to work in his field, right? And so at the 11th hour, he got his last batch of people, and they worked 1 hour. So that's 12-hour workday. And so the way the Lord put it to me is most people have a 9 to 5 job, right?
Mm.
Here in America, you have an 8-hour workday. And so you work your 8 hours, and then you put your other 4 hours in building your other business, being your entrepreneur, whether it be getting an education or just doing whatever it is you need to do. And an hour of that you spend, um, in the Word and seeking God, because you want Him to be in the big fat middle of it, and He's going to give you insight and direction. As we see throughout the Bible, people, Isaac sowed and during a famine and got 100-fold return, right? So, that's something to be mindful of. When things are good, it's easy to go, okay, I'm going to go in business. Everything's going great. The economy's doing good. Everything's doing good. But also in famine and things are down, people are still making money.
Yeah.
It's just different people making other money. Um, and so God has the insight, and we see Joseph also, right? Six years of plenty's coming, and then 6 or 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine. And so the 7 years of famine he was ready for, and he became very wealthy, right? Egypt became very wealthy in those 7 years because they planned. And so, um, there's strategies. And so you want to get those strategies from God for your business. And that definitely gives you the upper hand. If you do what God has told you to do, you cannot lose, right? It's impossible to lose.
Mm.
And so that's your most valuable insight right there. And so, but and a lot of people have problems making their schedule and planning and whatnot.
Yeah.
So that was the outline that God gave me, and I'm sharing with other people like you. And hopefully your audience can go, oh, there's probably somebody out there that's going to hear this that has been in a quandary, like, how do I do this?
Yeah.
And so if you're like a single young guy or girl, that's pretty easy for the most part to get into that, because you're the master of your own time. Once you start getting a family, challenges can arise, but also you can like tag team with your wife. You got a wife, husband, your wife has skills and abilities, right? And so you can go do your 9 to 5. I mean, I know women who have surpassed their husbands and making more money,
Yeah.
and their husband takes care of the kids, right? There's a certain point once they're weaned, or maybe even before that, you can work things out. And the women, in their spare time, while they were having babies and raising babies, they found a few hours a day to work on their own business, and they grew the business. And then they passed their husbands, and so now their husbands help them do whatever
Yeah.
it is they need to do. And so that's a really cool place to be. So I want to encourage the ladies out there, and the men also, because sometimes men, they've got their ego involved. And so sometimes it's hard for them to get a hold of the idea of their wives making more money, and some ego psychology and stuff going on there. Maybe they're going to think they're the boss now that they make more money, and so they have to deal with all that stuff. But hopefully you can get over all that and help your wife do whatever it is that she wants to do, whatever's in her heart, and maybe she will pass you up someday, and that would just be awesome.
Yeah. Well, it's just a thing, isn't it? I mean, the acceptance, of course, is a big thing about any place you're in. And here we're talking about gender acceptance, but then also, like, for example, when you're with friends, you could have that one friend who has an idea, and instead of belittling them, kind of accepting it and always being supportive of people around you, whether that be relationships, but it could also just be friends, or your mentors, or the people that are learning off you, right? And I suppose kind of what you said was really, no matter what happens, you need to keep moving. So that kind of thing you said about, if there's a famine, you can't just kind of go, oh, well, this is awful, I'm just going to sit down for a bit. Because it's usually in the difficult moments that you get tested the most. And even if it means that you've slowed down your operations, as long as you're still moving, taking that one step after another, even if those
Hmm.
baby steps, it means you're in the right direction. You're going in the right direction, right? And I think that's really what business is, I think, because once you've taken that step to go, I'm not going to be an employee and I'm going to be someone who works for myself, you can't let that momentum fade away, can you? And you have to keep on going in the right direction with the vision in mind, with where you want to reach, and taking those steps. And there's so many different ways people can learn about this process, right? There's so many business books, there's so many business podcasts, there's so many coaches out there. And it's almost like got to the point where there's too much information for someone trying to kind of pick up on this, which is why I think it's important, like speaking to people like you, Joseph, where you can kind of distill that into figuring out exactly what's going to work for someone. But I wanted to ask, because you're a coach and because you've kind of got so much information, do you have any specific, let's say, books or resources that you've kind of either created yourself or that you've read elsewhere which you feel like are really good at getting someone started? Because there's loads of books out there for, like, for example, the typical book phrase goes like, oh, 10 steps to take to be successful, or 10 things that
Hmm.
successful businessmen did. But are there any books that kind of without being personalized, because you can't personalize a book, almost feel like a personalized experience when you're reading them?
I find myself getting little bits and pieces
Mm,
from different places, right? And so a lot of the times when you listen to a podcast like this, or you read a book, or you go to a seminar, there may only be one or two little jewels, two things that you get the information from that spurns you on to the next thing,
yeah,
right? The next step. And so I've got some of those from this last week of stuff that I went to conferences. And so I mean, I like reading Maxwell. The Maxwell books usually got stuff, the law of the lid kind of uh helped me see where I could have grown better, like in the tree service, where I was able to look at my own thinking, my own, the mentality I had, and said, okay, well, this is where I failed. This is the resources I had. These are the decisions I made that were wrong decisions. And so obviously you don't want to just wallow in those thoughts. You want to
yeah,
go, okay, I failed here. Let's not do it the next time. Let's apply this to the next thing that I'm doing or what I'm currently working on, and not make that mistake again. And this is how we fix it, and let's fix it and do it right the next time. And so so that's the one that comes right off the top of my head. When I read that, I'm like, wow, okay, this is what I should have done different here.
mm,
Like you said, the mindset. This is how I was thinking, and I had this set of resources that I didn't recognize, and how to do it and what to do. And I wasn't thinking big enough. I was thinking too small, and I should have expanded in this way at this time, and blah blah blah. Okay, well, let's not do it again.
right. So it's all a learning process, and you're someone from the sounds of it which likes to just take in a lot volume of content and then pick and choose what you like. Everyone has a different ways of learning, and I think I'm the same, because it's difficult with a book. It's difficult with a podcast to know exactly what you're going to get until you get into it, right? So you almost have,
Right.
yeah,
Right, and people have different things they offer, and different perspective, and
yeah,
different skill sets. And so, like in my book and learning marketing about that, I've got like 12 or 15 or maybe even 20 people that I've talked to, and some of them, they're all kind of repeats, right? But
mm,
then there's other ones. Okay, well, we're doing this one thing different, right? And so, okay, that's what I want to do. And so there's like two or three of them that have really what I want. And and I found that none of them have all of what I want, right? And so that's where the broad education comes in, just talking to as many people as you can, and hearing what they have to say, and sifting through all that to the few nuggets. Okay, this is what I want to do. And so it would be nice if one person did everything,
mm,
and you could get in their program and learn everything. And there's probably a few things out there where you can do that. But usually there's a lot of people that have learned different things. They've got different skill sets, different perspectives. And so you can find a few things in there, and go, okay, this is, and then come up with a plan, going, okay, I've heard all of it, right? I've heard this huge amount of information. This and this makes sense to me where I'm at and what my goal that I want to achieve. So let's do that,
yeah.
and go for it.
Yeah, it's that quote, isn't it? Open as many doors as possible, and then later on choose which ones you want to walk through.
Right.
Um, and that's kind of what you're doing, because if you limit your own options, you're not going to know what else you could have had available. So it's always about
Mhm.
widening those horizons, taking every opportunity as it comes, and just trying to talk to as many people as possible. I think it's those softer skills that actually determine how good you are as an entrepreneur, I think, because sure, you can have the material value of like, this how much money I have and stuff, but I think
Mhm.
it's when you delve deeper, kind of what this whole entire podcast is about, delve deeper and asking people about the softer skills they've learned, and then you realize there's actually this absolute treasure trove of experiences and conversations and kind of insights that these people have gained over the years that has led them to then have the materialistic outcome that they're at right now.
Mhm.
And you would never know that until you were to have a deep conversation with them. And so, kind of, we've talked about your coaching and your book, but then what else do you offer people who maybe want to, interact with you or maybe that want to learn from you, Joseph?
Yeah, speaking, right? So I'm building my speaking business. I've got um, several unique original speeches that I put together and still developing.
Mm.
And so, of course, talking about that, I've got my books that I've written. If you want to grow rich, well, that I'm rewriting that one. So about the peaches, avocados, and tomatoes, I could talk about that. And of course, I've got just a boatload of life experiences
Mm.
that put all into that. So building the speaking business is kind of so I'm really at my next step and it's out there in front of me. I've done almost everything I can do to prepare. I know that I've got a few things to do to prepare to speak to the producer coming up in
Oh
June.
yeah, yeah.
And I've got most of it done. I've got the screenplay written, so that's the big part. And but I think I've got a few other items I need to do. But for the most part, I've got that ready to go. And so right now, my second string is speaking. So I'm building
Mm.
that, and so that's how I can help people.
That's exciting. That's exciting because it's fine. It's fun. You've got this speaking thing where you're telling your own story, but I think it's always nice when people have like a creative outbreak. Sometimes people just
Uh-huh.
like, oh, I've spoken to some people, but they're like, I'm a very corporate entrepreneur, but I'm doing music on the side, or but I'm writing a book on the side. I think it's quite nice to have that little creative out thing. So you're doing your own thing in terms of teaching people and running your own businesses, but then you've got this movie coming out, which seems so random. You're like, what? But it's quite nice, and it gives you something new to kind of experience, right?
Right, right. So that's the most important thing because I can say for sure, God gave me that. So it's like, okay, whereas you're prioritizing things, right? What's the next thing I should be doing? It's right. We call it the next right thing. You
Hmm.
don't want to just be doing anything. You want to be doing the right thing. And so as I'm prioritizing things, I go, okay, what has God given me to do? What's the last thing or what is the thing that God put me on that I should be doing? And have I done everything for that?
Hmm.
And so, you're finding the next right thing.
Hmm.
And so developing, I still haven't done a PowerPoint. I've done Word, I put things together and other stuff. So I still need to learn how to do a PowerPoint. So that's on my list of to do here in the very near future. Putting one of those together because I can get up and talk and do some other stuff. I got one slide or whatever we can put up, but I need to get that skill under my belt. So it's a
Hmm.
never-ending process, right? There's always so for me, I've got 10 things I could do today easily that feel important, right? And but there are the one or two or three that are yeah we need to do this now. This is
Yeah,
the
actually gonna create change.
right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I know I've had this question from the start. I'm kind of winding down with it. I wanted to ask because you've mentioned that you first on some aspects you just get involved with something. So like the tree business, you just kind of get involved with it. It's you yourself just doing it and learning on the job. But then in other
Mhm,
situations, you've had mentors which have kind of guided you how to do it using their experience. So I mean, I always find it a little bit not contradicting, but it's like two different things for someone because sometimes online you'll hear that, won't you, where people will say, you don't need a learner, you don't need to read more books, just get involved, you need to get into it. But then at the other time, it's like sometimes you do need a learner. How can someone who's going into a new realm, let's say someone's going to, like, let's say writing a book, how can
mhm.
someone know whether it's actually better for them to just do it and learn on the job, or whether it's better for them to pay some money and get a mentor and do it that way?
Well, obviously, if you don't have money, then you just got to do what you can. I
Of
mean,
course, yeah,
without the
yeah.
money. Yeah, so you can go online and do tons of stuff. But if you do feel frustrated and you want to go somewhere and you just don't know what to do,
Hmm.
a coach will get you there. So, and here's the analogy that I've got with that. It's like being grafted. So we talked about growing trees from seeds, right? but you can get a jump on the program. You can beat the 15-year avocado thing by getting a graft. So
Mm,
you've got a stalk, and you graft a branch on that's already producing, and then boom, you're immediately producing. And so in a lot of places, coaches will do that for you. You're just at that place where you've got a skill set, you've got a vision, you got something, and you just don't know what to do. And maybe part of it is accountability. So there's a few things that coaches offer there, right? And uh and so they can do that. When I was surfing, I wish I'd had a coach. And so another
mm,
mindset thing was, I remember as a kid reading a surfing magazine, and I was looking at the professional surfing contests, and the guys that were surfing at the time, the pioneers, they were making like $500 or $1,000 to win a contest. And so I'm looking in there, and there's one or two contests, and this guy won this one, the other guy won that one, and then the other guys are getting like 200 or $100, right? And so I saw that, and I said, you can't make a living doing this, right?
yeah.
There's no way to do that. And of course, during my lifetime, that changed. And so, and I was listening to an interview with Kelly Slater recently, and he's 11-time world champ. And so he saw where surfing was going, right? And so that helped him. He had a vision and projected, and I didn't see where surfing was going. So I think, and I remember other conversations I've had with people, and I wish, as when I was younger, that I had somebody to put that out in front of me, and show me, have that vision and give me some direction. This is what you do next.
Mm,
And so, because I look back and go, okay, I wish I'd had a coach for that. If I'd had a coach, at least I don't know how well I would have done, but at least I would have been able to do the best with what I had, you
right.
know? And so, looking back, I go, okay, if I'd had a coach, I could have developed myself to the best that I could have done. And really, and so I look back, okay, I should have done this, I should have done that. Well, if somebody had been there, they would have kind of adjusted my mindset and said, okay, do this, push it here, push it here, and learn this new thing, do this new thing, um, and do this different. And that would have pushed me, and I could have done the best I could have done. So obviously, once again, we don't live in our regrets.
Of course.
We take those, we go, okay, I did it wrong here, let's not do it wrong the next time. And so, every person has to decide for themselves, what is the next step. If you're totally lost and you have vision and a goal and you don't know what to do, that's usually a good place to find a coach.
Right. And then I suppose the follow up question for that is, there's so many coaches. How do you know who's going to be the right one for you and who's going to kind of resonate the best with you and guide you?
Well, right. So you have to talk to them, and there needs to be kind of like a click. In
Yeah.
any relationship, like many people say, it's not just the product; it's they buy the person, right? And
Mm,
so the person helps you. Here's another thing. Like the coaches do know some stuff a lot of the times, but and they can help you and give you direction, but usually it's just about asking questions. The coaches know the right questions to ask. And
mm,
so I might not even tell you what to do. I might ask you the same question 5 times, because I know you're not going all the way with your answer, right? Okay, there's
mm,
something else there you're not saying, and there's stuff inside of you that the coach is looking to bring out. And the coach doesn't have the answers, they have the questions. You have the answers. And so sometimes a coach is going to bring that stuff out, and that's really what it is. And just get you talking to yourself, talking out loud, thinking out loud, and taking the next step that you're not willing to say. You're not willing to go, okay, that's my next step.
mm.
I knew that, but I wasn't willing to do it. I wasn't willing to, the thing that, nobody's saying out loud. We have that saying, what nobody says out loud. So somebody just said it out loud, right? Okay. Um, so that's what the coach is there to do, to help you say it out loud and go, okay, here we are. This is what I got to do. I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to admit it. I didn't want to say it, but now it's out there. Let's do it.
Wow. Okay. So the coach is not there to give you the answers. They're there to make the right environment for you to figure out the answers yourself. And I suppose that
Right.
can only be done by a coach who understands you and, you know, as you said yourself, clicks. There's no point being with a coach who has their own agenda and it doesn't align with yours. It's never going to work out, is it? You need
Right.
to, and realistically, there is really no way to judge that apart from talking to them and getting in touch with them. There's going to be so many coaches, and I'm sure if you spent another year searching coaches, you could find a person who was better, but then that's a year who's gone by. So you have to kind of do that analysis, don't you, of like, let's say I've spoken to 50, or I've spoken to
Right.
30, and this is the best one, and let's just go with it. Because ultimately, if I spent another year speaking to another 50 or 100,
Right.
there's no point in me wasting that much time. And yeah, just finding the one that clicks with you and going for it, I think is the best advice. Really, there's going to be no easy way out ever. If there was going to be an easy way out, a you wouldn't have been an entrepreneur, and b everyone else would have been doing it. So there's going to be it's going to be difficult either way. But I suppose leading back to what we said originally, if you have that vision and whatever you're doing right now is difficult, it's going to get you to the vision. However, you have to just take those steps, don't you? So, Joseph, thank you so much for coming on and sharing so openly what you've said in terms of what you do, because, as I said, some of the things that I read about you just doesn't make sense. I was like, he's an arborist, he's also a surfer, but he also runs a business and he speaks and he's written a book. And I was like, someone please put this all together to me. I don't understand what's going on. I mean, it's just all over the place. So it makes sense when you told me your story of like you started off at the age of 15, and you're already learning these skills of like going to people, approaching people and marketing yourself, really trying to identify when people may have a problem and how you can find a solution for them. And that kind of process of pivoting, going from cutting lawns to then going trees is better. Let's go for the more riskier thing that makes more money. These are skills that sometimes people actually learn very later on, but you were learning at an early age. And yeah, you're kind of going on, growing, taking the steps, figuring out that you want to write a book, but not knowing how to market. Realizing later on that was a problem and then learning from it. I like your kind of process of not holding regrets, because some people it does get to them. And especially if you spent hours and hours, days and days, months and months writing a book, only for it to not do anything, it's just eats you from the inside, right? It's devastating.
Right.
But you've kind of got this optimistic outlook where you're like, it is what it is, and I can only learn from it. And if I made the same mistake again, then it's my problem. But I'll make sure I don't make the same mistake again. And I suppose being in that situation where once you've got money and you realize that you need a bit of help, also talking about how to get a coach and a mentor and someone who can guide you, and you've got your own coaches and you yourself are a coach, which just shows that even if someone is a coach, they don't always know what's going on exactly, and they need to help themselves. And it's for especially people starting off in the entrepreneurship world, and I'm sure you've seen it yourself, Joseph. They're kind of scared to ask for help, as if it weakens them, and they're like, if I ask for help, it's not really me, and I've kind of succumbed, and my ego is going to take a hit because I've asked for help. But look, there's people who are super super successful, and they'll still openly say, I still get advice from others, and it just goes to show that in this entrepreneurship world, everyone's kind of no one quite knows exactly what's going on, and everyone's there to help each other out a little bit, and you should throwing yourself into there and see where it takes you. So thank you so much for sharing what you said, Joseph. It's been really insightful. It's helped me to understand a bit more of what you're doing, and it sounds amazing with all these experiences you've had. You're then sharing it with others, and yeah, in terms of like a final question, because you've done so many things and you've kind of had so many experiences, for someone who's trying to start out new in whatever field it may be, but they're not quite sure whether it's the right thing for them or not, what kind of advice would you give them to kind of get them to start?
Yeah. Once again, there's inside of you, so you have to dig a little bit,
Hmm.
and just thinking about writing. I remember back when I was in middle school, I had a friend in one of my classes, and he reminded me not too long ago that we were in a class, and every other week we were alternating of who got the best story, because we every week we wrote a short story in our homeroom.
Hmm.
And so one week I would have the best story that by the teacher's assessment, and the other week he would have the best story, right? And so we kind of went back and forth. And so just looking all the way back, that was a skill that I had,
Hmm.
right? And so everybody's got those. There's things that you can do, and maybe you haven't pursued it. And I've heard of people that had an invention and they started it, and then they got discouraged and they put it in the attic, and then somebody somewhere said something triggered them, and they go, okay, well, I'm going to go back to that. And they went back and they finished it, and they made it and sold it and made a boatload of money. So maybe for those of you that are out there that are discouraged, think about what was a dream that you had in the past that
Hmm.
you laid down, you put aside and said, okay, that's not doable. And so maybe you've learned some stuff here today of how I can do that. Um, Maybe I need to put that schedule, the 12-hour schedule into play, and just realize, because like 15 years is a long time to wait for something. But you just think, do I want to be in the same seat 15 years from now? I mean, if it takes 15 years, so that's about what I'm looking at from the time that I first had the idea, the insight to make my book or movie, right?
Yeah.
We're I think I'm at about the 12 or 13 year mark, right? So it might be 15 years before I see my movie on the big screen. That's kind of what it's looking like. And so, but boom, once we get there, that's success. And so that's something, obviously, once you achieve that, to be very proud of. It's not something everybody can do,
Yeah.
right? And so you've got something in there, and that is a challenge with people that start new things, because nobody's done it before. And so you have so many voices out there going, you can't do it, nobody has done that, that means you can't do it either. But that thing that makes you different, that makes you unique, is your wealthy spot. And so you're just going to have to go against all that resistance to win. And you think about David. He took out Goliath, and nobody else was going to do it. They were all scared out of their minds. And he goes, what? I can do that. I killed a bear, I killed a lion, right? He had a skill set. And so I can take on this guy. And so nobody knew that he killed a bear or he killed a lion. Maybe his family knew, I don't know. But he said, I can do this. I've done A, B, so now I can do C. And so he went out there and he did it. And so that may be you today.
Hmm.
You've done it, and it's the next step. Hopefully, Krishna and I have inspired you to push on to your next step and do that thing.
Amazing. That's amazing advice. And it just goes to show that you have to have fun in what you're doing and take the experimentative process as not only learning but then also just kind of taking it as fun, because no one really knows what's going on. And I suppose that, whilst it's fun to have the material thing, it's also fun in the growth process. And I've spoken to so many people who've said that, I've spoken to people who've had like loads of 15 businesses, some of them reaching 7 figures. And then I speak to them, what was the most fun part? And they'll be like, actually, the most fun part is not having the 7 figures, it's growing it to 7 figures, which kind of doesn't make sense, right? You initially be like, surely it's just fun to be in your nice little penthouse and have all the
Uh-huh.
millions with you. But they're like, no, that's not fun, because now I've got the admin work of maintaining the money. The fun part is
Right.
actually having nothing to start off with and building something from nothing. Because when you're at
Having
the
that challenge, having the
exactly,
challenge and overcoming the challenge.
exactly the challenge, and also if you're starting at the bottom, you have nothing to lose, so you can go into it so much more actively and kind of throw yourself in. Whereas when you're already at the top, you now have something that you can lose, so it's a lot more riskier if you do go for something. And I suppose that makes it a bit more
Right.
mentally difficult, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Joseph, for coming on, sharing that amazing advice, and just giving people inspiration to take that step into something they would have never expected. And who knows, 15, 20 years later, looking back and going, I'm glad I did that one thing that day.
Right.
And, no one knows where it takes them, right?
Right.
Amazing. Thank you so much for coming on. Good luck with the film. It sounds amazing, and I'm glad it's kind of like something that after 15 years is coming into fruition. I'm sure it's going to be amazing. I look forward to keeping in touch, Joseph.
Okay. Thank you, Krishna.
Thank you. Bye bye.